Hey, Feisty podcast listeners. Sara Gross here, founder and CEO of Feisty Media. Before we get started on today's episode, I just wanted to jump in here and tell you about the special deal we are running for Feisty fans and podcast listeners for our new course, Brain Power, which is an expansion of the podcast series you are listening to. The course is designed to give you deep understanding about how the brain works and how we can help keep it working through all stages of life. Inside, you will learn how your brain and hormones interact to impact mood, motivation, performance, and recovery, how stress affects your brain, perhaps one of the most useful parts for me, and the course gives you tools to manage that stress before you burn out or find yourself in cognitive decline. You'll learn about the impact of neurodiversity and mental health, how to protect your brain and ensure long-term brain health, how to build a personalized toolkit for brain resilience using movement, nutrition, mindfulness, and smart recovery. So, as you're listening to the podcast, if you think you want to dive in deeper and learn more on some of the topics that are discussed, make sure you take advantage of our pre-sale $50 discount on the Brain Power course. The course will officially drop in June, and this pre-sale is the very best price you will get. For more information or to buy the course, you'll find the link in the show notes of this episode. And now, on to the show. Hello, Feisty friends. Sara Gross here. We are back with another episode, the third episode actually, in our series about brain health with sports psychologist Dr. Erin Ayala. Hi, Erin.
Hello.
I'm so excited. Okay, I listened to this interview that we are about to present this morning, and it's just packed filled with like actual practical advice about little things that I could even do during my day, during my packed day to improve mental performance, I think, or brain performance. So tell us a little bit about our guest.
Yes, this was such a fun one for me as well. And there were so many times where I was like, oh, noted.
Exactly.
So today's guest is Kat Boere, who is a Ph.D. candidate in cognitive neuroscience at the University of Virginia. And she's actually also doing research over at Nike right now for athlete performance insights. So it was a really cool conversation because it switched a little bit from this overall health focus to more on, as you noted, kind of like decision-making and brain performance, how that intersects with exercise and endurance and the environments that we're in. So it was a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, for those of us who have been waiting for, a young researcher to come through who's asking questions about both sport and exercise, neuroscience, and women all in the same sort of research program, Kat's one of those. So I'm excited about this interview too.
All right, Kat, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for this conversation. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah. Hi, Erin. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here. My background is dynamic, let's say. I grew up on Vancouver Island, or actually a little island off the coast of Vancouver Island called Gabriola. And from a young age, I was just interested in being outside and challenging myself and sports and all the fun things like that. And as I kind of developed in my teens and 20s and now 30s, that trend has continued. So my undergrad was in math, and I did that at UBC. And then I did a master's in biomedical engineering. And now I'm soon to be finishing my Ph.D. in cognitive neuroscience. Simultaneously, right now, I'm just in Oregon working at Nike for a 1-year project doing some neat research.
And what about neuroscience and kind of like cognitive science? What was it that really drew you to the field? What sparked your passion about that?
Yeah, a few things. I would say when I was younger, I was always just curious. Like, I look back now thinking about what I was Googling in my free time, and it was like always weird cognitive things. Like, I'm not sure if you've heard of the author Oliver Sacks.
Yes.
But he's a really famous neuroscientist that passed away in the last couple of years. And he has these amazing books about unique cognitive phenomena. And I just loved them. And so when I finally made the switch into cognitive research, it felt really natural. Along with that, I had a pretty bad brain injury in my 20s, a climbing accident. So I had a really bad concussion, and just having that experience and really feeling the cognitive changes that I still feel today, actually, sparked a lot more interest in it as well. Just like, wow, this is such a sensitive yet dynamic and adaptable thing that we need to learn more about.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. So as you know, the kind of overarching theme of these conversations in this podcast mini series is brain health. So when we think about brain health, how would you define that? What does it mean when someone has good brain health?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think it can mean a number of different things, but in my mind, it's kind of like a balance in a sense. Like, I don't think we can necessarily have good physical health without good brain health, which to me is not only like cognitive function, but also mental health. And I believe all these things work together for feeling your best, really.
Mm-hmm. And so then when we think about your area specifically with the cognition, so if someone is like, doing well, how is that going to show up for you in your research? What are some of the things that you look for? Some of the dependent variables, for example, or some of the outcomes?
Yeah, so my research in my PhD has been focused on brain activity or electroencephalography. And so I actually measure the electrical activity that your brain is generating while you're doing a task or during resting state. And this method has been used for almost 100 years now. It's pretty wild. And we separate the brain activity into these different oscillations or patterns. And each of these patterns has been associated with a different type of cognitive state. So, for example, there's this very specific pattern that happens in the front of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, and it's called a theta oscillation. And we know that increases in frontal theta oscillations usually represent like increased cognitive load or trying really hard, things like that. So using these measures, we can see what's going on in your brain in a sense, and how you are cognitively working for certain tasks or interventions that might make you work harder at the same performance level or impair your performance and things like that.
And are you able to share a little bit about your dissertation, depending on how far along you are with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, my dissertation started looking at moral decision-making. So a little bit different what I've ended up in now. And 2 years in, I kind of switched. And so now my research looks at the effects of prolonged exercise on cognition and cognitive function. And particularly, I kind of went this way because if you look at all of the literature to date that's connecting cognitive function to exercise, the time durations basically end at 40 minutes to an hour. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies looking at the effects of exercise on the brain, but they all are like 30 minutes of exercise and things like that. So it's a big question mark. And as an endurance athlete myself, I was really curious. Like, I was experiencing these things and sometimes feeling like my brain was mush after a race or a long training session that I know a lot of athletes can relate to. And wondering, like, is this bad for me? What's going on here? And so that kind of inspired me to pursue that direction.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And then, so last summer, I did a large scale study across 6 ultra marathons throughout the summer. So in total, we had about 90 participants, and we did pre and post cognitive measures before a 50K ultra marathon. And so again, that was looking at brain activity. And so those results are just being parsed out right now and written up. And then in the fall, we did the same for a marathon and just looking at female athletes. And for that study, we had a lot more measures. So we did a whole bunch of lab testing before the race. And we're also looking at indicators of low energy availability in those athletes, things like stress injuries and gastrointestinal function and menstrual kind of irregularities. And seeing how that connects to cognitive changes from the race. So again, this is unpublished data, still writing it up, but some really cool results in there. One has really spoken to me and I think deserves a lot more attention is the connection between cognition and REDS. or low
Yes.
energy availability. So we found
Yep.
that athletes who were higher at risk for low energy availability had a larger decline in accuracy on the cognitive task from the race.
Yeah.
So a lot more to be looking at there.
Yeah. I also think about even, as a sports psychologist, I work with a lot of athletes who may be unintentionally in a low energy availability state. And a number of them are college students. They're student athletes. They are working so hard. And the cognition is very much needed. And then they have these really hard training sessions or, spring training camps, and the brain feels like mush. So it sounds like there is something to that based off of your research.
Yeah, definitely. And again, a lot of like personal inspiration in that. Like when I was in my undergrad, did a lot of training and racing and found that like I really couldn't perform at school while I was racing hard. Didn't have education about proper nutrition and things like that at that age. So looking back, like I know I was in a high risk area, and I strongly believe in myself that was the connection.
Yep. Yeah. That's interesting. I often joke. I think it's probably a running joke in a lot of endurance circles is like, I'll say to myself, oh, I'll play catch up with such and such on Saturday or Sunday after my long run or my long ride. And then you finish the long run or ride and you don't have the capacity. You just want to sit on the couch, which fueling has also been a game changer for me. Right. So that makes sense with that low energy availability and proper fueling. So
yeah, I agree. I'm still racing these days, and I've noticed a huge change myself. It's just like, how much more can you intake?
Right.
How much better do I feel cognitively after races? Like I could go work on a paper after a race sometimes.
Yep. Yes. Right. Yeah. So then what are some of the takeaways based off of either that research or the other kind of research you've done in general for endurance athletes? It sounds like fueling properly is important.
Yeah, I think fueling properly, hydrating properly, having enough electrolytes, all of those things, kind of like generally taking care of your needs. Not only do we know it supports like exercise performance or physical performance, but even if you don't feel the cognitive effect in the race, I think the recovery effect on your brain is huge. And I think that will lead to improved performance moving forward. So something that I see or I've seen in the data sets that I've been telling you a little bit about is that when you're fatigued, whether that's from endurance exercise or a combination of not enough fuel or water or electrolytes, right? Collectively, this is all just stress on your brain. And I mean, one way to think of it is it's just stress. Yeah. And stress often impairs cognitive function. But there's also this effect that we see where the brain kind of like switches processing modes. And I think it's almost like an adaptive switch, although I don't have evidence for that yet.
The brain is trying to be more efficient and kind of going to certain like more well-known or kind of more familiar patterns, maybe.
That also, but I think like your brain is incredibly intelligent. You're trying to protect yourself and your brain is trying to preserve cognitive function. So I think the brain can detect that it's going into a stressful state. And I think it adaptively switches to lower processing modes or like faster, more efficient processing modes that use less energy in order to conserve that energy.
Sure.
Right. And then so it might still have that available if you end up in a critical situation where you actually need that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so what that also shows up as this switch from maybe like long-term decision-making to immediate gratification decision-making is one effect, right? And I'm sure we've all felt that. It's like, oh yeah, I should reduce my training load or something because we know in the long term it'll probably benefit us, but it feels so good to get that one big workout out or something like that. And I also think that shows up in recovery methods, like immediately post-race, if your brain's feeling a little fuzzy, you might not choose to grab your protein and carbohydrate recovery right after the race because you're like, oh, well.
Like in the moment, it doesn't feel like that big of a deal, or your brain justifies why you may not need it in that moment.
Exactly. So I think this can show up in a lot of different ways, not just like in a race scenario, but also in training, overtraining syndrome, like things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd also be interested, I don't know if you know any research about like if mindfulness could be a potential like antidote to that and changing when or to what extent your brain switches over. Do you know anything about that in the research?
I don't know anything about that specifically in the research, but I agree. I think that could be really beneficial. But what we do see is, so one way to describe these different systems of your brain is system 1 and system 2. That name was coined by this famous researcher named Daniel Kahneman in the 50s. And so system 2 is thought to be this deliberate, conscious decision-making mode where you're putting cognitive effort into making this decision.
Sure.
It's also thought of as slow thinking, whereas system 1 is thought of faster thinking. So it's automatic, it's quicker, it's more efficient, it's less metabolically costly, right? And so switching between these different modes, system 1 also goes to kind of these long-term memory or trained responses. So the more you practice making one type of decision, the easier it is for your brain to make that decision when you're tired.
In the future, under
Exactly.
duress or stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So kind of on the same vein that you're mentioning with mindfulness is practice. If you're practicing making these smart decisions in the future when it gets hard, you're automatically going to make that decision. And the same can be said during a race is fueling, hydration, all of these things, just having them so dialed so that you don't even have the choice of making a poor choice. It's just automatic, right?
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating from the sports psychology lens, because I think about the research that's been done on deliberate practice and intentional practice. You're fully present in the moment. You're focused on what you're doing. I often use the example of, if I've got a 1-hour bike ride recovery, I can hop on the trainer and put it on erg mode where it sets the wattage for me, and I can watch Netflix and Love is Blind or whatever I want to watch. That's not deliberate practice, even though I'm getting my workout in, I'm checking the box. But if I really want a lot of bang for my buck, I can hop on the rollers, do some bike handling skills, set my own power based off of my own knowledge of my body and what it feels like, bike handling. And that's where it's you're super focused. And then those skills translate to riding on the road, the pavement, racing, etc. So that makes a lot of sense. How might it show up in the race, especially for ultras, with decision-making in terms of when to quit, if it's time to quit? For example, sometimes, especially when you look at ultra runners, the support and the crew are known. Sometimes they have to make decision on the behalf of the athlete. So is that because they may not be making decisions in their best interest in that moment?
That's exactly it. And I think anything you can do to lower your cognitive load while racing is going to be beneficial. So some athletes you'll see, and I know you have more experience than anyone probably with working with this, but some athletes you'll see just they're just kind of quieting everything. They don't respond to people cheering them on, things like that. They're just keeping that load really low. And so the same is with kind of discussing with your crew what decisions you don't want to make. If you don't even have an option to make the decision, it's completely lowering your cognitive load. So you say, in these circumstances, I want to be allowed to DNF or leave whenever. And in these circumstances, you're just telling me to keep going. And so exactly what you're saying, it's being really prepared and offloading as many of the decisions as you can.
Yeah, that's neat. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially I think of I call it contingency planning or intentions, setting those in advance. What might happen that could go awry? What could really throw you for a loop? And then if and when that happens, how do you want to respond to it? And then ideally you can practice that, changing a flat tire, for example, on a bike, right? Fueling, nutrition, grabbing things from different pockets, all of those little things, right? So how about you've also done a bit of a segue here. You've done some research as well on kind of the brain and how it responds differently to training outside or exercising outdoors in the wilderness versus indoors. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And this is a very personal question for me as a Minnesotan who spends a lot of time on the indoor trainer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was part of one study where we looked at the effect of just a brief amount of exercise, so 15 minutes of walking, whether that was inside or outside. And so the outside was walking through a beautiful forest we have near our campus in Victoria. And the inside was walking through some buildings. And what we found was overall, there was an increase in cognitive function just by walking, which we already know exercise is good for the brain. But we were surprised to find that those who walked outside had a larger increase in cognitive function. So like a bigger boost than we had expected, which is really, really neat. And I think a lot of us have felt that result as well, like going for a run outside, just how not only like physically it feels good, but like mentally clearing.
Yes.
And so now this isn't quite my research, but I know a little bit about it for sure. There's multiple reasons why being outside versus inside could help increase cognitive function. So one of it is fresh oxygen, right? Inside's a little stagnant, so that increase in oxygen can help. The other one is sunlight. So we know sunlight is good for the brain. So just getting outside and having that extra stimulus. There's also this theory called attentional restoration theory. And so the idea is when you go into an environment that is softer and has less stimulus or stimulation, it allows your brain to rest and recover. So the way I think of this is similar to doing sets when you're doing a workout and having that recovery period in between your reps, right? So it's just allowing the brain or the muscle to get back its energy stores so that it can go hard again, right? And so we don't quite see that with indoor exercise. Like my experience of exercising indoor at the gym or even at home is there's still a lot going on. I'm still thinking about, there's the fridge I should probably clean out, or there's like 7 TVs in front of you, or
I was thinking Zwift. And I know some people who don't like it because it feels like too much stimulation with all the movement, the avatars, the characters, the numbers, the dashboard, all that stuff, all while exercising.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot on the brain, right? And so if the goal is to increase cognitive function from your bout of exercise, I would suggest not doing that. But again, it comes down to really your goal. What are you trying to get out from this exercise experience, right?
Would the same apply to music, listening to audiobooks, podcasts, like auditory stimulation?
I would assume so. I mean, any stimulus, whether it's visual or auditory, even like tactile, is going to be information that your brain is trying to process. So anytime you can reduce any of those, it's going to help your brain basically soften and refresh and restore.
That makes sense. That's interesting. I saw a talk, it was, I guess, back in January with a brain scientist in the military, and they've done a lot of research on these kind of little mindfulness breaks. And they did it with, I think, 40 platoons. And they looked at, in sick call, musculoskeletal injuries. They looked at, cognitive function, all these different things. And the people who engaged in small mindful moments throughout the day, kind of scattering, to reset, just as you're suggesting, had significant improvements compared to those who didn't. So I think there's a lot of power in those small mindful moments, but in the current world that we live in, it can be really hard to do that because of just this hustle culture and this kind of rise and grind, right? So what suggestions might you have for folks who want to start working on having some moments to reset and recalibrate?
Well, I think you named it perfectly right there. It's just like these small little bites. I don't think it needs to be a big thing. It's like start small, start accessible, and you don't need to necessarily increase from there, right? I have this app on my phone. I'm forgetting the name of it totally, but it just 3 times throughout the day, it'll just give me a ping. And at that ping, I'll take 2 minutes, just eyes closed, just to breathe and be present. And I find even that, so that's 6 minutes in a day is profoundly impactful for myself. So I think take small steps, reduce kind of that stimulation in that way. It's definitely one way. And then think overall to kind of increase brain health in terms of cognitive function is really just look at the basics. Like we don't need to get complicated with all of it, right? It's like basic human needs. Are you eating? Are you hydrating? Are you sleeping properly? Are you exercising within moderation? Are you finding meaningful connections with other humans? I think all of these things are profoundly impactful on brain health.
Especially in kind of a world where we've got all of these little hacks and brain games and ways to optimize and, like these new tools, which could be really cool, especially for people who like data. What are some of your thoughts on those? So I'm thinking of, the bio, like the wearables, for example, but there's also, I can't remember what it's called. I'm blanking on it right now, but it's like a neurofeedback and it vibrates on your wrist and is supposed to send messages to your brain. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like, what are your thoughts on some of those new and upcoming technologies and whether or not it's kind of worth the squeeze?
That's a good question. I think if it reminds you to start a practice, then I think it's awesome.
Sure.
I think I'm skeptical about neurofeedback devices in general. I think there's just not enough literature out there to support it. But if that tool helps you to sit down and breathe mindfully for 5 or 10 minutes, then like that's important. That's impactful,
Yes.
right? So whether it's the tool or the tool's ability to get you to do something, it can be helpful for sure.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. What about brain games? So in psychology, I've often learned kind of the ecological validity is not great. So you might get better at playing the game, but that's not necessarily going to translate to your day-to-day life. Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, from my understanding, they can be helpful. I think as we age, we all will have natural cognitive decline. That's just part of life. But I know the longer and the more that you can keep your brain stimulated, you can actually prevent some of that decline. And so, yeah, I think brain games can be great. I think what's the New York Wordle?
Yes.
Like, games like Wordle, I think, are fantastic. And if it gets you thinking, then that's great.
That makes sense. New York Times, I recently discovered their app. They have free games every day. Wordle is, I don't know if it's technically formally that one, but they've got a lot of fun kind of word and letter games. And then also visual games with different patterns and kind of matching and things like that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I love the games on there. Me and my partner every morning do that.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. Building it into the routine. Yeah. Yeah. How about, so you've done research on so many things. Blue light glasses. This is something that has really, I guess, in the past few years, really started to explode. What do you know about those and whether or not it may be worth investing in those, especially for those of us spending a lot of time on screens throughout the day?
Yeah. I mean, I've done some research looking at brain activity while wearing them, with the caveat that this was a resting state kind of study that we did. It wasn't tied to doing work on your computer while wearing these, so I can't speak to that. But what we found in resting states, so just basically relaxing while you had these glasses on, is that we had a reduction in this brain activity called beta. So beta oscillation, it's a higher oscillation frequency. And it's associated with kind of like anxious energy sometimes, or like being really active. Yeah. So we interpreted that as a decreased like anxious energy, kind of like settled the mind in a little bit.
Yeah.
So again, with all of these tools, it's like, try it. If it works for you, that's great. It's not going to work for everyone. But if it's helpful for you, then there's value in that.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And honestly, that has been kind of the vibe and the overarching theme in all these conversations I've been having is if it works for you, great. Right? Like there's no one right or wrong way, whether it's the cold plunges or, the diaphragmatic breathing, which we know is also really effective. But it's like, are you going to be able to do it regularly and consistently, mindfully? And then if you're able to do it, then it's probably worth the squeeze. But if it's going to be something you pick up for a week and then you don't use it, then you're not going to see many differences. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How about some kind of misconceptions about brain health? There are a lot of conversations now about brain health kind of happening in the field, which is great. And there's also a lot of information out there. Google, social media, Facebook groups, you name it. What are some of the misconceptions that you might have recently come across that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think one that we've kind of already touched on is that you don't need to do these big, massive changes to your life to start to increase your brain health, right? It can be very small, accessible changes that can have a big impact. So I think that's really important to highlight. Like maybe it's just subtly changing your diet or adding an extra hour of sleep, going to bed an hour early. Like taking a 15-minute walk to go outside, like that's not huge and can have a big change.
Especially over time, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
How about the balance between like genetics and environment and then like our individual actions and behaviors or routines? To what extent do we have control over our own brain health?
I would say a lot. I don't know that literature that well, but our actions in our environments influence it greatly.
Yeah. And it's like take advantage of the control that you do have, right? In order to, it's not even necessarily optimizing. It's just how to live a healthy life in general, right? So
yeah, exactly. I mean, like we don't have control over our genetics. We really don't. So maybe there is a genetic component, but we might as well take advantage of what we can control and take care of.
So for, women who aren't listening and they're like, okay, this is all really helpful information, but where do I start? What are some of the suggestions that you have? So like 15-minute walk outside, for example, other things that you feel like could fit into a really busy lifestyle for women who are doing all the things, ourselves included, that feel doable and not too overwhelming?
Yeah, I think first, like just take a moment to think about, again, your basic needs. Like, are you exercising, right? Maybe you already have that checked off. That's great. Are you eating properly? Maybe there could be some refinement there, like a small change. Are you hydrating enough? Are you sleeping enough? Like, again, all these things I've already mentioned, but just go through and like, is there one small change that I could make that could improve one of these factors? Right. And it doesn't need to be big.
I'll often say with, especially the teens I work with, I'll say like, let's start with what not to do. Because often we know what we should, quote unquote, shouldn't be doing. And in this case, for brain health, it could be like, okay, I'm not going to sleep at all. I'm going to pull as many all-nighters as possible. Not going to eat well. I'm not going to be hydrated. Never going to exercise. And then it's like, okay, well, what's the other end of the continuum? You're going to do all of those things all the time to the point where it essentially takes over your life. Is that worth it? Because what's the cost? And then it's like, what's the middle path? Like, that's where we can start and try to find those little kind of tips and tricks to bring, like, start where you are. You don't have to have the perfect training plan, which many of us enjoy, myself included. So, yeah.
I also think, like, try to make fun of it, right? Like, if say you're someone who doesn't actually enjoy exercise, but you love socializing, like invite a friend out for a walk, right? Like make something that is going to be fun for you. Maybe you want to find like a gamified app that gives you healthy recipes or something like that. Like there's lots of different options out there.
Like figure out what works best for you and start there. Yeah.
Because if you want to do it, you're going to do it.
Right. Yeah. There's that phrase, like, what's the best exercise in the gym or with an exercise regimen? And it's like the one you'll do, right? Start there.
Exactly. Yeah.
How about for folks who want to learn more about brain health, aside from the course that's coming out soon, what suggestions do you have in terms of resources, either kind of thought leaders to follow or other kind of books or things to kind of look into where folks can learn more in some of these areas?
Yeah, there's one podcast actually I'll recommend. It's called That Neuroscience Guy.
Cool.
And it's pretty small, like they're 2 minutes to 10 minutes each episode, and it's accessible neuroscience daily. So a lot of it goes through really interesting, like cognitive function things that is accessible to everyday life. But also a lot of like brain health tips and facts that you can apply yourself on an everyday basis.
Are there any things that over the years, since, having sustained your own concussion and then really diving deep into this area, any changes that you've made to your own lifestyle or routine that you may not have if you hadn't known about this information or this research?
I would say the biggest change I've made in my life is being aware of stress.
Yeah.
I think managing stress in whatever form that looks like is going to have a huge impact on your brain health and your happiness every day, right? Your ability to function and perform. So I would say taking a look at like, where are your stressors and can I reduce that in any small way?
Yeah. We spend so much time looking for like, what are the other things I can add, ironically, to like reduce stress. But I think we don't often enough ask the question, like, what can I get rid of? Or what can I remove? What can I simplify? And I think there's a lot of power in that. So,
and it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the world we live in, right? All the messages that we're getting. It's just like there's always this pressure to do more and to be more productive. And I think we're starting to see some changes with that. And in the literature, the research on stress, there's also more books coming out that have been really helpful. But I think it's similar to other things in the field where it's just going to take a while for the curve to kind of catch up, for it to become more of the norm. So for our listeners, tell them, what are some of the kind of the modules or the lessons that you focused on for our up and coming brain health course?
Yeah, so I'm in the first section, module 1, and I describe basic neuroanatomy, kind of introduce everyone to the brain, and go through some brain parts, kind of what a neuron is. So like a really good introduction of what we're going to be building on throughout the course. I also do an introduction to neurotransmitters, so the chemical messengers that are in our brain, and kind of a basic introduction to their functions and where they might show up in different areas.
Neat.
And then I also have a little piece in the last module, so looking at really practical tools to implement, and discussion on sleep. So practical tools to improve your sleep or enhance your brain function based on sleep.
Sure. Yeah. What was your favorite part about the course? Either your lessons or someone else's that you've read? I know I've had a lot of fun seeing what other people are contributing.
Yeah, I've been really inspired by reading the other sections as well. And like being like, having like a bit of a pondering myself, being like, oh yeah, that's right. I haven't actually considered that before.
Yeah.
And so just seeing how everyone's different expertise kind of fits together while also providing a different perspective is really neat.
It was super cool. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll provide more information for any listeners who want to learn more about the nature of the course, how to access it, the sale, all that fun stuff. So folks can stay tuned for that. For people who want to follow you or follow your research, follow your adventures, what are the best ways for them to do that? Whether social media, email, website?
Yeah, follow me on social media. I have to say I'm not that great at posting on there.
That's okay. It's honestly probably good for the brain health.
On Instagram, I'm Katherine Boere, so just my first and last name. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn, again, first and last name. And if you ever want to reach out, feel free to message me on either of those.
Awesome. Cool. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up for the day?
Take a moment to breathe today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kat. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Erin.
Hey, feisty people. CEO Sara Gross here. I want to tell you about my favorite product for muscle strength and recovery, which has also become a favorite amongst all of my friends at CrossFit, Prevenex's Muscle Health Plus. A few months ago, I started using it during my lifting sessions. We call it red juice at CrossFit, and it has helped my power, speed, and I've even put on some muscle mass, which has typically been really, really hard for me as an ex-endurance athlete. Muscle Health Plus contains creatine monohydrate, of course, but it also contains branched-chain amino acids and essential amino acids, plus some even more cutting-edge ingredients like HMB and estrogen, all of which are scientifically shown to increase muscle growth, recovery, and strength. So basically, it's a convenient, all-in-one formula that goes way beyond creatine alone. Unlike most supplement brands, Prevenex tests everything with pharmaceutical-grade precision, and they also offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Try Muscle Health Plus today, and you can get 15% off your first order with the code PERFORMANCE at Prevenex.com. That's performance for 15% off at Prevenex.com. Hey Feisties, it's Sarah, just jumping in here to remind you about the pre-sale discount on our Feisty Brain Power course, featuring the experts on this podcast series and more. If you want to dive in deeper on what you're learning in this podcast, and if you want practical strategies for optimizing your brain health through your lifespan, and get a $50 discount, just click the link in the show notes of this episode. Okay, back to the podcast.
Okay, Sarah, this was such a cool
It really was.
conversation
Yeah.
for me. Oh my gosh, I was nerding out over it. As someone, it was really neat because I'm also a researcher and I come from a psychology background where a lot of our sample sizes are 300 or 1,500.
Right.
And neuroscience is so different. So I found myself wanting like really concrete answers and details. And Kat did such an awesome job of providing context and letting us know and reminding us this is still really new and emerging because of the types of questions she's asking. They haven't been asked before.
Yeah. And I love the way she explained things so that I really felt like, oh, I could take this information that's even part of her current research project and like think of like how this applies to me without actually being like, this has definitively been proven by science. Because like you said, it is a lot of times we're asking these questions for the first time. So I really love that intersection between like, okay, what happens if we exercise more than 30 to 60 minutes in during the research process? And if we take sex differences into account during the research process too? Because like obviously that's so many of us who do more than 30 to 60 minutes of exercise. And we do know, like you two talked about during the interview, like we do have this experience of like at some point your brain does get a little mushy and it needs to recover too. So, and you asked her really great questions too. Like, definitely,
it was a fun one.
Yeah, that about the blue light glasses or just those bits and pieces that we can start thinking about, like, how does this actually function for me?
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see how that kind of type 1, type 2 decision making comes into play. I mean, I'm sure I am not the only athlete out there who has seen how decision making changes based off of the types of events. So for example, as a psychologist, I work with a lot of folks with like race anxiety. And so that definitely affects decision making. We're often more likely to make kind of these emotional or even impulsive decisions sometimes where we think back and like, why did I do that? Right. But what Kat's looking at is arguably like very different, where we've been really fatigued and under this cognitive and physical load for a really long period of time. How does that affect decision making? And we see that, I mean, I'll see so many things happen in like ultra distances where athletes, aren't necessarily able to make the best decisions for themselves in the moment. Right. And that's exactly what she's tapping into.
Yeah, I love that. I also thought of it for myself as the CEO of a growing company. I've really noticed that the speed at which I have to make decisions has changed. And I've kind of trying to be observing myself. Like, how do I make decisions and how can I make good decisions faster or take in all the information? So I was really relating to what she was saying about system 1, system 2, right? And I think I naturally am more like a system 2 thinker, like methodical about how I'm thinking through problems and making decisions. But sometimes you need to use your instincts and move a little faster. And once you have some experiences of like system 2 working, like I've thought through these things before, then you can start to like shift the dial and go, okay, now I can make decisions more quickly. Like things like, for example, hiring, I now have a bit of a pattern of when things have worked. And if I had a certain instinct or I saw some characteristics during an interview process, those people tend to pan out. Whereas before so there's like this pattern. So I can click into, and I literally did this last week where we were interviewing someone for a contract position. And I've never done this before. Right on the call, I was like, we're going to offer you a contract. It was the first call we had with her. We're going to offer you a contract.
And you just knew.
Yeah, I just thought, she's checking all the boxes of the things that I now have this experience to, So my brain was it just worked faster, So there was something different. So I feel like I definitely was relating on some of what Kat was saying about that.
And it makes sense too to kind of get some of those practice and those reps in so that your brain is more used to and able to make those decisions when under more of a high pressure situation or when there is more of a load on your body or your brain.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like how whether it's athletic stress or stress of entrepreneurship, right? And how you're making, life, parenting, all of the above, all of the things combined. And then you're making decisions under stress. So how you're dealing with that stress can change. And can you change the way that you're experiencing the stress and making the decisions? And is your brain doing? So it's fun to hear that your brain is actually responding in real time to those things.
Yes. And to think that we're going to have research in the coming years that is specific to women. And endurance and exercise and outdoors and like all of these things that she's looking at. It's such an exciting time. It's not, this is just the start.
And Kat's not the only one. It's like a balm to my soul. Like really knowing knowing that
like, let's go.
exactly
Yes.
that they're a Kat and other. I mean, the young woman who introduced me to Kat is also, I think she's a neuropsychologist actually, and I do
Yep.
CrossFit with her here in Victoria, and she's also doing really cool research. So I think there's going to be this accumulation of this body of work done that we so badly need.
Yes. Very exciting time. Exciting place to be with just like this topic in general. So we really appreciate everyone tuning in and listening to us unpack all of these really cool topics.
Yeah. Well, another great episode. Thank you so much, Erin. And bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.